contexts and subtexts. So basically, my paper reads Mithu Sen's I Am Olchiki as a powerful intervention into the politics of language, place and belonging in Shantiniketan. At the center of my argument is a simple but urgent question. What happens when a script that belongs to the land is made to appear as a stranger within that same land? In asking this question, I treat Olchiki not simply as a writing system, but as a public claim to memory, visibility, and habitation. Now, the picture quality is, it's like kind of breaking, but I hope you can understand. So these scripts are basically Olchiki script that kind of represents the Santali language, okay, the Adivasi language of Birbhum and that particular location. So first, let me explain briefly what Mithu Sen's I Am Olchiki is. So created for the Shantiniketan chapter of the Bengal Biennial in 2024, the project was realized in Pearson Pulli in collaboration with Shonnashi Lohar and the indigenous Shantali community members. The work paints the Olchiki script, the writing system developed by Raghunath Murmu in 1925 for the Shantali language, across the mud walls of the village home. So this is one picture, and there are, so this is the group who were working in that project. So they have been painting the village walls, and they were writing the scripts all over the village walls in that particular village in Shantiniketan, Pearson, Pulli particularly. So it also extends beyond the wall through QR codes, a small primer-like booklet, and digital links that connect the script to wider circuits of recognition and learning. The mural is therefore not only an artwork, it is also pedagogic, communal and spatial act. It places Shantali script where it has long belonged, in its lived landscape, shared walls and everyday social space. This leads to my next point, that by inscribing Shantali into a Bengali dominant linguistic landscape, so if you, those who are not from Kolkata or not from West Bengal, it's very interesting that Shantiniketan is the place that is regarded as the hub of Bengali literature and Bengali culture. You know, all Vishwabharati is there, and Rabindranath Tagore, then Konika Bandopadhyay, these are all Bengali stalwarts. But if we, as we all know, that Birbhum is also the the place where indigenous Shantali people lived. So their language, their culture somehow is getting otherized, is getting marginalized in a space, and Bengali, which is kind of the universal, the universalism, European universalism of Bengali, is kind of taking over. So this leads to my third point, that by inscribing Santali into a Bengali dominant linguistic landscape, the mural stages what Sen calls unlanguaging and what I describe as lingual anarchy. In her own words, Sen sees herself as a lingual anarchist, interested in documenting, deconstructing dominant language constructs as an act of resistance. In the critical collective interview, she speaks directly of how Bengali continues to overpower Olchiki in Shantiniketan. The mural interrupts that hierarchy. It does not ask permission from Bengali literary prestige. It does not translate itself into comfort. Instead, it suspends hegemonic fluency. For a moment, Bengali, which is usually the culturally dominant language of Shantiniketan, falls silent, and Shantali appears not as a supplement but as a presence. This is why the work is unsettling. It returns voice and visibility to a language subjected to white erasers. And it does not, and it does not do inside a classroom or an archive or particularly a museum, but a place that is living and breathing with the people of community and outsiders. So at this point, I want to explain how Dalit locational hermeneutics helps my reading. I use this phrase as a method not to collapse Dalit and Adivasi histories into one category, but to borrow from the anti-caste thought a critical way of reading space from the side of those who are structurally pushed to the margins. Uh, Gopal Guru argues that experience is not incidental to theory. It is constitutive of who gets to know, speak, and interpret. His work insists that social location matters to knowledge. Similarly, Shormila Rege's Dalit feminist standpoint makes a related argument by foregrounding how marginalized experience produces critical knowledge from below. Building on that intellectual tradition, Dalit locational hermeneutics allows me to read Shantiniketan not simply in terms of intellectual tradition, but Dalit locational hermeneutics, yes, not from its self-image, but as universal humanist culture center, but from Pearson Pulli, from the edge, from the wall, from the script that dominant culture has not fully absorbed. In other words, the location here is not a backdrop, it is an interpretation. It tells us where power sits, who is seen, whose language becomes public, and whose remains peripheral. This takes me to my last point. Because of the paucity of time, I'm not going into the other points, but the last point I want to mention is the very title of my talk. If you see that it's the mother tongue with M in parentheses. So I use this phrase to name a double condition. Santali is the mother tongue in the sense of intimacy, inheritance, and community memory. But it also is the other tongue, entrenched within a Bengali dominant cultural geography that should have made room for it and yet has not done so. The bracketed M or the M in the parenthesis is important because it holds together belonging and exclusion. It marks how a language can be native to a place and still be treated as marginal within that place. My argument then is that visibility itself becomes a mode of belonging. To let Santali speak, even briefly, in the public sphere of Shantiniketan is to reconfigure who counts as we. It is to disturb the assumed linguistic community of the place to widen the social imagination of those who belong within it. Thank you.
Our next speaker, according to my list, is Dr. Shushmita Panda. Am I right? Okay, so we will skip over her. The next possible speaker is Vikram Rai. Okay, Vikram or Vikram? Vikram. Sorry, my eyes are really not. I forgot my reading glasses. I wasn't prepared. Okay, so Vikram. So while they're getting technology ready, just way of introduction, Vikram comes to us from University of North Bengal. And I think, are you presenting together or? No, you're a separate presentation. Okay. I had a chance to talk to you earlier on. Okay.
Hello. Very good afternoon to everybody. My name is Vikram Rai. I from the University of North Bengal. I'm a research scholar and I come from Darjeeling, one of the world's nicest place and where you get lovely tea. My topic is nation sports and the margin, indigenous representation and cultural inequality through the lens of Bollywood sports biopics. I'm presenting this topic because it examines how Bollywood sport films represent indigenous and ethically marginalized communities, particularly from those from Northeast India, and how these representations intersect with broader ideas of nationalism and cultural power. The sports film or the sports biopics or the sports film occupies a very unique position in popular culture because they not only entertain the audience, but they also shape the idea about nation, citizenship, identity, and belonging. Through the analysis of 3 films, which are my favorite, Mary Com, Chak De, and Penalty, this research basically explores whether cinema genuinely includes indigenous communities or whether it incorporates them into dominant nationalist narratives in which they dilute their distinct cultural identities. If you look at this, if you look at how sports plays a very significant role in contemporary India because it is often celebrated as national achievements. Successful athletes become symbols of national pride. At the same time, Bollywood remains one of the most influential and cultural institutions in India. It reaches millions and viewers. It makes a very important role in shaping public perception about society, culture, and the nation. Over the last 2 decades, sports film has emerged as one of the biggest Bollywood successful genre. Such films such as Lagan, Chak De, Bhag Migga Bhag, Dangal, and Mary Kom have both achieved commercial success and critical acclaim. However, many of these Indian films and most of these Indian athletes come from communities that they have historically remained marginalized within mainstream cultural representation. This includes athletes from India, tribal communities, rural regions, and minority groups. This raises a very important question. When the stories about these athletes enter mainstream Bollywood cinema, how are their identities represented? Are they represented authentically, or they transformed into some dominant ideas of nationalism and Indian identity? Well, the problem lies in limited research because what we found out is the research specially focuses on indigenous and northeastern representation within Bollywood is very limited. The gap is significant because there appears to be a lot of contradiction. On the other hand, athletes from marginalized communities make substantial contributions to India's sporting achievements. On the other hand, mainstream media, cinema, often struggles to represent these communities authentically. For example, if you look at the movie Mary Com, in the movie Mary Com, you see that we had to actually get somebody from Bollywood to play Mary Com, and it was not a northeastern character who played Mary Com. So these are some of the problems that are there. The controversy surrounding the Mary Com as Priyanka Chopra is a clear example where it shows about the film brings about national attention to the achievements of this Manipuri boxer, but it questions regarding the authentic and representation and the absence of indigenous actors in portraying indigenous stories. This suggests that the visibility alone does not necessarily lead to meaningful representation. My research objectivities, well as it examines the representation of indigenous and northeastern Indian identities in select Bollywood sports film. Secondly, it aims to analyze how these films construct and communicate ideas of national identity. For example, if maybe right now Manipur is burning, but if we had a Manipuri actor playing a Manipuri, maybe a Mary Kom in Manipur, maybe things would have been different then. But then obviously the Bollywood industry does think differently, and I think these are where we try and understand how the industry actually works and whether Bollywood simultaneously promotes narratives of inclusion while reproducing forms of exclusion and inequality. Together, these objectives help us to understand the complex relation between cinema, culture, identity, and power. The research questions here, we have asked very broad questions on how indigenous communities are actually represented, how nationalism influences these representation, and how the audience make their perceptions. And we have looked upon some of the, if you look at some of the methodology that we have used, is that we have used a critical discourse analysis where we looked at these three films, Mary Kom in 2014, Chak De in 2017, and I'm sure nobody's heard about Penalty, because in Penalty, they have actually used Northeastern actors to represent a footballer who comes all the way from Northeast to play football for our country. So these are things, and we have used some of the frameworks. We have used the Stuart Hall's representation theory, where we are going to use this process. And the second is we are going to look at Antonio Gramsci's concept of cultural hegemony. So these are the ways we are looking into and study. This is also my PhD, my topic, where I'm looking at marginalization of characters in Bollywood films. And I've taken sports biopic because three are very important things to me. I'm a marathon runner, so sports is very, very close to me. I love films. We have made a lot of films and documentaries in Darjeeling. And since I'm a Gorkha, the question of identity is always there. So looking at these three things, I've come to my my research, where I'm looking at these three things. And if you look at it, you see the inclusion of indigenous identities within dominant nationalist frameworks and the central contradiction. And I would like to end up by saying that in Bollywood there is a symbolic inclusion but a cultural eraser. I think Bollywood sports films create visibility of indigenous athletes as national heroes, yet distinct cultural identities are diluted. Representation remains shaped by power and ideology. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Moving forward, moving along, I believe Chhatrapati Avnesh, and you are coming to us from the University of Delhi. That's right? Thank you. Platformed caste, social media networks and the reproduction of caste hierarchies in digital publics. Good. I'm sorry, I should have also said that this is a jointly authored paper, isn't it? Are there two authors? Are you the second author? And you are Sandeep Kumar?
I am Sandeep Kumar.
Okay, and you are then... okay, got it. All right, well, two authors, one of you are presenting. That's the game plan, right? Okay, good. Let's go.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sandeep. Today I am presenting a paper title called Platformed Caste, Network Publics and the Reproduction of Caste Hierarchies on Social Media. This research paper looks at how caste, India's most enduring social inequality, plays out on social media platforms. The central question is straightforward. When marginalized communities go online, do they find freedom or do they find the same barriers just rebuilt in a digital form? The background and the context of the research is when social media first expanded, there was a real excitement. The idea was that anyone with a phone now had the same platform as anyone else. A Dalit activist in rural Maharashtra and a politician in Delhi were suddenly equal. Early scholars believed this deeply. But platforms don't land in a vacuum. They land inside societies that are already unequal. In India, that means caste. Caste still shapes who gets heard and who gets resources and who gets represented. So Dalit communities entered digital spaces carrying both the hope of finally being heard and the weight of centuries of exclusion. They started using hashtags like Dalit Lives Matter and Caste is Not Past, doing something mainstream media had never allowed, speaking directly, publicly, and on their own terms. The problem statement of the research is social media is doing two things at once. On one side, reproduction, which means dominant caste groups use platform features like amplification and searchability to spread their narratives further and faster, quietly framing caste as cultural heritage rather than oppression. On the other side, resistance. Dalit activists are organizing, documenting violence, building solidarity, and creating spaces where their experiences can finally be named. Both are happening simultaneously on the same platforms, sometimes in the same thread. Social media is not a savior and not simply an oppressor. It is a contested space, and that tension is exactly what this paper examines. This research study has four objectives. The first objective is to trace how caste discourse is produced and circulated, not just what is said, but how it moves and who amplifies it. The second objective is to understand how platform features like searchability and amplification give dominant caste narratives disproportionate visibility. The third one is to examine how Dalit activists have fought back by constructing digital counterpublics, which are alternative spaces of resistance and solidarity online. The fourth objective is to contribute to communication scholarship on the global south, a context still underrepresented in international media research. These objectives led to three focused research questions. The first question is how platform affordances on X, formerly Twitter, shape the visibility of caste discourse. This is about what the platform itself does to these conversations. The second research question asks how dominant caste communities strategically use social media to reproduce caste hierarchies online, not just what they say, but how they use platforms architecture to their advantage. The third research question is how Dalit activists have built counter publics to challenge dominant narratives and mobilize resistance. All three questions are guided by frameworks of platform power, networked publics, and counter public theory. The study draws on the three theoretical frameworks, each illuminating a different piece. The first one is network publics, developed by Pure and Guzel. It shows that digital platforms create communication spaces shaped by affordances like visibility, persistence, and searchability. These are not neutral features, but they interact with existing inequalities to produce uneven communication environments. The second one is counter publics, which is developed by Nancy Fraser. It says that when marginalized groups are excluded from mainstream discourse, they build alternative spaces. Fatima, Pearson, and Jognar demonstrate that Dalit communities do this exactly online, building identity and mobilizing collectively. The third one is platform power, which says that algorithms actively shape discourse. Dominant groups can exploit these features. Together, all three frameworks let us see both the hierarchy and the resistance. This study uses mixed digital methods approach, combining social network analysis and critical discourse analysis. Social network analysis maps the structure, who is central, how information flows, and how visibility is distributed. Critical discourse analysis examines the meaning, how caste is framed, how discrimination is narrated, how resistance is expressed. Together, they give a much fuller picture than either method alone. The dataset focuses on approximately 9,500 public posts across three hashtags: Dalit Lives Matter, Caste is Not Past, and Ambedkarite, collected from January to June 2015. Only English language posts on caste discourse were included, spam and duplicates were filtered out, and all usernames are fully anonymized. The key findings of this study are the first one is caste hierarchies are being reproduced online, but in a subtle manner. Dominant caste, dominant caste accounts are more connected, more amplified, more searchable, and caste is rarely defended openly. Instead, it gets reframed as cultural pride, which normalizes privilege while making oppression invisible. The second finding is the Dalit counterpublics are genuinely emerging. Campaigns like Dalit Lives Matter create real solidarity spaces. People are documenting discrimination and building community across geographical boundaries. Dalit women especially are asserting identity and finding support online. The third finding is digital democracy as structural limits. Unequal internet access excludes the most marginalized entirely. Algorithmic invisibility shrinks the reach of Dalit voices. Online harassment suppresses participation. The anti-caste conversion on X is largely urban and digitally connected. The communities most affected by caste violence remain most underrepresented online. There are three core arguments that research brings together. The first one is platforms have dual nature. They reproduce hierarchy and enable resistance at the same time. Any analysis that only looks at one side is incomplete. The second one is platform power is structural, not accidental. The design of algorithms, visibility logic, and amplification systems consistently advantage those who are already advantaged. The third one is going online does not liberate you from offline inequality. The digital divide is real. Harassment is real. Algorithmic invisibility is real. Digital democracy as it stands remains incomplete. This paper contributes by connecting platform power research with caste scholarship in the global south, a pairing that is underexplored and urgently needed. Thank you.
Thank you. That was fascinating. The next speaker we have is listed as Dr. Deep Deepti. That's you. I'm sorry, I'm murdering names. And you are coming to us from Central University of Karnataka, right? And okay, and we're going to hear about reinscribing gender hierarchies through mythological retellings in Kannada cinema, a study of the Kantara duology.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Deepti. Along with my co-author, Dr. K. Karthik, we'll be presenting the work in progress paper, Reinscribing Gender Hierarchies Through Mythological Retelling in Kannada Cinema, a study on Kantara duology. So when we look into the background of our study, we all know that myths and folklore are among the oldest form of storytelling through the communities, through which the community preserve their collective memories, beliefs, tradition, and moral values. So such South Indian cinema, particularly in Kannada industry, has frequently adapted stories from Ramayana, Mahabharata, and local legends. So we can see it has maintained a strong connection with regional folklore and cultural practices from the beginning of Kannada film industry. So these films are not merely for entertainment, they influence how audience understand the concept of gender, power, tradition, community, and identity. So our problem statement here is that the mythological narratives function as powerful cultural tools that shape social understandings of gender. In such films, male heroism, ritual authority, and divine legitimacy dominates the narrative framework, whereas female characters largely occupy supportive or peripheral roles. So we have a lot of examples in South India, that is like Kantara duology, as I mentioned, Kalki, Brahma Yugam, and Adipurush, and many such films. So these kind of narratives raises the concern regarding the representation of gender, where it reinforces the patriarchal ideologies. So the significance of our study is that firstly, that we know that the cinema plays a major role in our life, influencing people. So it functions as a major cultural apparatus through which myths are mediated, popularized, and reimagined in contemporary society. And we can also witness that gender hierarchies are rarely neutral in such narratives. And particularly, aspects such as heroism, sacrifice, divine sanctions are often mapped with masculine ideals, whereas feminine is configured either as support, objective of devotion, or threat. So, hence, examining such mythological retelling illuminates how gendered power is narrated, visualized, and circulated. So we have our research objectives here. The first one is to analyze how myth and folklore are reinterpreted in contemporary South Indian cinema to reaffirm or challenge patriarchal social orders and gender hierarchies, to examine the visual construction of masculinity and feminine in mythic narratives. And the third objective of our study is to explore the cinematic techniques such as mise-en-scenes and symbolism through which gendered power dynamics are visualized and reinforced. So we have tried using three theories here to study our topic. The first one is the feminist film theory, which helps us to examine how cinema constructs gender relations and reinforce patriarchal ideologies through narratives and visual representation. And we used myth and ritual theory to weave myths and rituals as cultural mechanism that that communicate and preserve social values and power relations, and hegemonic masculinity to explain how certain forms of masculinity becomes socially dominant and culturally idealized. And looking into methodology, we have used qualitative approach. So it uses textual analysis as a primary method to identify key scenes, character portrayals, and recurring motifs in that shapes gender discourse. And further, the analysis examines the mise-en-scenes to decode symbolic construction of masculinity and the feminine. And in addition to this, the study thematically identifies pattern of reinforcement or disruption of patriarchal values through mythic retelling. Through this methodology, the study seeks to reveal how the selected films, both perpetuates and problematize gender hierarchies through its visual narrative languages. So we have chosen the two films, that is Kantara, released in 2022, and Kantara, A Legend, Chapter 1, released in 2025. These are the release posters of the films. And coming to the key findings, we have found that male authority is not presented as a divinely endorsed responsibility rooted in folklore, ritual, and ancestor lineage, but it has portrayed as a natural, sacred, necessary for social order. And both the films repeatedly frame the male protagonist as a protector of land, tradition, and community. And the representation of folklore, ritual practices, sacred traditions in cinema gives us impression that gender hierarchies are culturally authentic and historically continuous. As a result, patriarchal structures appears to be natural rather than socially constructed. So both the films largely represent female characters as mothers, romantic partners, caregivers, and more as supporters. And there are feminine values that are present, but it is overshadowed by narratives centered on male heroism and authority. So when we come to the general discussion in Kantara, that is released in 2022, the male protagonist Shiva is constructed as masculine force whose identity is deeply rooted in physical contents, divine embodiment, and land defense. The female characters such as Leela and Kamala in the film are marginalized and shown as love interest, victim and symbol of sacrifice. Whereas in Kantara, A Legend Chapter 1, 2025, the feminine becomes more visible compared to the previous film that is released in 2022. However, masculine subject remains the primary narrative. The hero is a vessel where women are either guides or adversaries, and the ritual transformation serves to restore the power of the male protagonist. And the mise-en-scenes consistently prevails masculine visibility in placing male characters at the center. We have already seen that in the posters which I have shown in the previous slide. And camera angles, lightings, framing techniques elevate male protagonists into heroic and divine figures in the film. The visual language normalizes patriarchal power by presenting masculine dominance in an integral component of cultural tradition and mythological legitimacy. And to conclude, the Kantara duology employs mythological retelling as a powerful mechanism for constructing and legitimizing hegemonic masculinity. The film challenges certain social hierarchies such as feudalism, class, caste structures, but simultaneously it reinscribes the fundamental hierarchies of gender. Myth is retold not to liberate the feminine principle but to justify subordination of patriarchal order. So it is important to note that the enduring appeal of these films does not lie on their rebellion but reaffirms that even in the world of divine and powerful goddesses, the ultimate responsibility of natural order lies on the shoulder of man. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's fascinating. It's as usual. Now, did you say that that this is a co-authored paper because the next name is okay? So you are also presenting. Gotcha, gotcha. And that's Dr. Karthik, Assistant Professor, Central University of Karnataka, right?
A very good afternoon to one and all who are present here. I take this opportunity to thank ICA Regional Hub for providing this opportunity. I directly move with the paper co-authoring with my Dr. Deepthi, who is also the co-author for this paper. The paper titled is Mainstreaming the Marginalized Consciousness in Tamil Cinema, a retrospective of Mari Selvaraj films. Moving on to set a background, the perennial problem of caste consciousness and caste supremacy continues to be a dominant socio-political and cultural scenario in India for centuries. We know that caste hierarchy still exists, and most prominent constant victims of caste violence, oppression and sexual harassments. Today, there is a strong evidence of marginalization that is multidimensional, encompassing social ostracization, political underrepresentation, and economic exploitation, trying to create a cycle of deprivation that is difficult to break. Such impositions of on the human senses to see or to hear demonstrate caste was embodied into the sensorial regime, and because of that they are rarely reflected in mainstream media discourses for several decades, particularly in Indian cinema. Having the potential to demonstrate oppression, deprivation, humiliation and marginalization at various cross sections of the society through these cinematic elements, we notice that Dalits are largely underrepresented, misrepresented and silenced in popular film narratives. And we need to wait almost 75 years until the 21st century where we find notable filmmakers in Tamil cinema, obviously in other films across India, representing marginalizing communities, particularly from scheduled caste. And these filmmakers who emerged from these marginalized communities employ a very distinctive narrative structure, techniques that convey struggle, oppression, and uprising of marginalized communities. And the intervention of these filmmakers are not just merely aesthetic, but also profoundly political and necessary for social transformation. Hence, looking at those filmmakers, examining and understanding those distinctive narratives are important to notice how their voices are concerned. And with this, moving on to the research objective, we broadly worked on three objectives to identify the various motives and symbolic elements to express oppression in narratives, to trace the distinctive narrative structures and patterns to utilize to demonstrate the uprising of the marginalized communities, and third, to establish how a filmmaker himself emerges as an author in developing a unique film narrative style to mainstream the marginalized consciousness. Going on to the theoretical framework, using the theoretical framework of author theory, it provides a powerful lens for understanding how directors' voices, how they challenge dominant narratives, and authors' unique worldview, recurring themes, as well as stylistic flourishes, a very recognizable method across the body of work in filmmakers. And this study particularly shifts from the very idea of author theory from purely a artistic personality into a theory of political and cultural intervention. And this theory allows the filmmakers, particularly from the marginalized, to project and to inject the counter narratives into the mainstream cinema. With this background, this particular study uses a qualitative textual approach and looks at four films of director Mari Selvaraj. The titles are Pariyerum Perumal in 2018, Karnan in 2021, Mamannan in 2023, and Vazhai in 2024. And these are the four films that are being selected for the analysis. Broadly, when you go on to the key observations in the analysis, the key recurring themes, all of these three themes, they talk about caste oppression, where every film examines caste as a systematic force shaping education, public spaces, politics, labor, and everyday life. And when it comes to dignity as well as self-respect, it comes up with characters seeking recognition, seeking respect, seeking human dignity rather than just economic advancement. And resistance and uprising is another important area this film talks about. It talks about personal accession in Pariyerum Perumal, a collective rebellion role in Karnan for that matter, a politically empowered person in Mamannan, and a child which is seeking for survival as well as resilience in the film Vazhai. And all of these films recur the idea of marginalized voices through their films. And there is also, when you look at the consistent narrative pattern for that matter, these films have repeated symbols, similar conflicts, shared ideological concerns where it explains marginalization, it demonstrates struggle, and then it moves on to assertion, and finally how it transforms individuals' life. And you can notice distinctive symbolism. So there are a lot of symbols that Mari Selvaraj uses, particularly animals for that matter, where he continuously uses in all of his films. So if you take Pariyeri's dog symbolizes innocence, loyalty, and vulnerability. He symbolizes donkey in other film that symbolizes suffering and exploitation of oppressed communities, and he uses pig in the film Mamannan becomes a symbol of dignity and resistance against caste prejudice. And you can notice when it comes to the personal vision of Mari Selvaraj, Dalit consciousness and marginalized expressions are being used. He has produced a stylistic signature which is based on realism and which has a blend of symbolism and political commentary and ideological consistency. So moving on to the final leg of discussion and conclusion, we can definitely say Mari Selvaraj is one of the distinctive voices of contemporary Tamil cinema, and his film demonstrates a remarkable thematic consistency, for that matter, through his recurring motives, through his symbolic imageries, and emotionally resonant storytelling. The progression across the four films, he was expanding exploration of marginalization from educational discrimination to collective rebellion and political representation. And while all of his films addresses different dimensions of oppression, they collectively articulate a broader project of reclaiming dignity or of visibility as well as agency of historically marginalized communities. I would conclude by saying I would conclude by saying his work demonstrates a very clear author conscious, a vehicle for cultural critique, social transformation, and marginalized voices. However, when it comes to the works of Mari Selvaraj, masculinity, the issue of unresolved question of masculinity, what my co-author portrayed in other film, remains here. The central consciousness remains to be a Dalit men consciousness. The author remains to the authoristic limitation in his future work must and should address this issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Interesting. These two papers are intimately connected, right? Yeah. Good. According to me, the next speaker is Adrita Roy, and you are coming to us from the University of Hyderabad. Invisible behind the lens, women cinematographers, gendered labor, and the Indian screen media industry. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adrita Roy, and I'm a research scholar at the University of Hyderabad. So today I'm presenting a paper titled Invisible Behind the Lens, Women Cinematographers, Gendered Labor, and the Indian Screen Media Industry. So this research sits at the intersection of feminist media studies, labor sociology, and the political economy of the screen media production. At its core, it asks a deceptively simple question, that is, why in an industry that produces some of the world's most prolific and globally distributed cinema are women so persistently and structurally excluded from the camera department. This paper is based on my desk review and also the part of my literature reading for my PhD thesis. So it's part of that. So first, coming to the historical illusion of the male technician. So to understand the present, we must first interrogate a historical myth that cinema's origins are overwhelmingly credited to the male pioneers. But this narrative has been systematically constructed at the expense of women technicians' contribution. Consider the two figures from the very birth of Indian cinema, like Dadasaheb Phalke, celebrated as the national name, had adorns India's most prestigious film award. He directed Raja Harishchandra, India's first full-length feature film, but alongside him worked his wife Saraswati Bai Phule, who was India's first female editor and film technician. She mastered the available photographic technologies, prepared the film developing chemicals, and manually perforated the raw film stocks. But her contributions were never acknowledged. Her legacy remained largely merely a historical footnote. It is a founding template for how women's technical labor in Indian cinema has been systematically erased from public and academic discourse. Coming to the global systemic deficit in the camera department, as we can see, there's an eraser not only in India, it is a pervasive structural reality across the major global screen media industries. Women constitute just 12% of cinematographers in the US among the top 250 films, which is mere 4% which was in 1998, according to the Celluloid Ceilings 2024 report. In Europe, as we can see, it's only 14% of women in cinematography, with the European Audiovisual Observatory projecting that gender parity will not be achieved before the 22nd century. France here shows that 13% with a detailed feminine coded jobs in the same industry, such as costume design, where 90% are female. Australia is showing 6%, and in India, according to the O Womania's 2024 report, women represent just 7% of the cinematographers, marginally rising from 5% in 2022. These numbers are not the result of a talent deficit, but they are the product of structural barriers. So, the compound impact of female leadership, as we can see here, one of the clearest indicators that this exclusion is network driven rather than merit driven is the compound effect of female leadership on hiring. Research shows that when a male director heads a production, only 5% of cinematographers were hired are women. The supporting crew also reflects this disparity. Only female writers were 12% and 17% were female editors. But when a female director leads, that figure rises to 34% of female in cinematography, with 52% of female writers and 27% of female editors. The key insight here is that hiring disparities in technical roles are not driven by a shortage of qualified women, but they're driven by the gendered networks of those who control the production. When women lead, a snowball effect disrupts. Traditional homophilous hiring pattern emerges. This is not a coincidence, but a structural evidence. These are some of the isolated arc lights that we can see in the Indian screen industry. So, despite this systemic exclusion, there are extraordinary women who have broken this through. So, I call them isolated arc lights, brilliance that illuminates, but that has not yet been sparked sustained change. So, firstly, in 1980s, with B.R. Vijayalakshmi, who made history as Asia's first woman cinematographer, dismantling the myth of exclusive male technical competence. Then in 2010, Anjali Shukla became the first and to date the only woman to win the National Film Award for the best cinematography for the film for Kutti Shrank. In 2018, Archana Borade won the Maharashtra State Award for best cinematography for her work on Idak. And in 2019, from Bengal, Madhura Palit became the first Indian woman honored with the Pierre Angenics Excellence Special Encouragement Award at the Cannes. These are not exceptions that prove a meritocracy, but outliers that expose its absence. Big budget productions consistently bypass these proven talents, perpetuating these marginalization. Another recent event that happened in the history of Oscars in 2026, that within the 98 years of the Academy Awards, Autumn Orkopo became the first woman of color to win the Oscars for Best Cinematography. There's a mechanical exclusion in the camera department. Like there is this neoliberal precarity where technical roles in the camera department are marked by extreme instability, wage disparities, unstructured hours, and a dependence on informal social networks for survival. The second, we have extended apprenticeships, where entry into the camera departments is contingent on the physical availability and long informal mentorship chains. Thirdly, the myth of the manual labor, where film work has historically been associated with heavy physical labor, which has been used to construct a patriarchal narrative that camera roles are inherently masculine and unintellectual. So from the literature review, we can see from different papers that homophilous collaboration and the boys club exist in the production, where sociological principle that people prefer to associate it with those who are like them. So highly precarious industries, formal hiring processes are effectively bypassed in favor of the established gendered homogeneous personal networks. This is the framework that I have focused. A critical and often overlooked dimension of this problem is historiographic invisibility, where existing scholarship of women in cinematography is overwhelmingly produced in the global north, leaving the women cinematographer in the global south, including the India, substantially undocumented. I conceptualize this as a three-tiered archival structure, where first is the institutional archives and public records are not focusing on women in cinematography, but mostly on actors and female directors. So, secondly, the archival, thirdly, the fragile digital footprints that are existing, and finally, the archival void. So, my recovery methodology that I'm focusing on is the polycentric multicultural feminism and intersectionality. Just one line.
Do you have a last slide?
Just
Go to your
one-
last slide.
Just one line from this, that from whom I've taken this theoretical framework is Sarah Projansky's work on historical survey, where Ella Shohat's concept has been spoken about. And this is the little bit
Okay.
of rise of institutional grassroots collectives we have across the globe. And finally, it's the last slide where I want to reclaim the lens by mandating the systemic archiving that is required for these women who are working in cinematography departments. So, firstly,
Right.
fund recovery methodology and
We need to stay
precariously.
within the time with ICA. But thank you.
But thank you so
And we'll have chance to continue in the Q&A. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thanks. Last speaker in my list is Tulika Chatterjee. She's not here. So this actually concludes the session, which has been fascinating. I will go ahead. Are you going to take over? Okay. So typically what happens at the end of the session, I'm sure you've seen this many, many times, is I'm going to briefly talk a little bit about each of the papers and see the connectivity between them, and then hopefully leave each one of you with a little bit of thinking. The one by, and I'm going to be bad with the names, pronounce it? Shornendu. Shornendu, the most interesting part, there are a lot of interesting parts to it, is you're actually working on something that is unique. It is analog. You're not in the digital realm, and what would be interesting to ask as a follow-up is, can this translate to the digital? And if it does, what kind of, what is the power that it will achieve? So that was my main observation. Rai, so, you know, a thing that struck me is obviously the question, why the absence? That is a rather mundane, banal question. We know the reason. I would encourage you, as you look to this, to think about the word representation. So there is another mechanism of looking at the word. You are literally a spelling. You're spelling it as represent, R-E-P-R, or is it represent? As if you are representing reality in a different way, right? So that's my main observation there. Anish, am I pronouncing that right? Yeah, Avnish. You answered what is the counter. Offer some data and case studies. That seems to be, which you don't have time to do, but as you're doing through, and yours is also a language concern, not so much as a concern, but something to think about. Reproduction, reproduce. Whenever you use these terms, they are very loaded terms. They come with a lot of history. For representation, for instance, if you look at some of the works of semiotics, that's a representation. Reproduction is incredibly important because are you taking something that already existed and reproducing it? So the language needs to be, all of it, all I'm pointing out are the major concerns. Everything else is good. Deepthi and Karthik, right? So you two are, so for Deepthi, I have a thing to consider. This is not for Karthik, this is especially for you. Sitting here and going, okay, so these two films, they are recreating or they are taking an existing myth, right? So ask a narrative question. How much freedom does the transformation of an existing narrative when taken to a different media, what freedom is there to create new meanings, which does not apply to Karthik because Karthik is talking about a social condition, and therefore the social something quite, in your sense, alarming, right? Something that you think should not be right. My argument would be I think you are onto something, but you need more theory to ground this. But the other question is think this through. Tell me what contemporary industry in the 2026, any kind, any domain, any vertical, where the men automatically put barriers for women. You see what I'm saying? I mean, what you're talking about, you're looking at one specific industry, but think about its connection with other industries. With that, I'll stop. Open it up for questions. Do we need a microphone for questions, or? We are open to questions for each other. Yeah.
My questions to you. You have mentioned that there is less representation of women. Women as mere characters in Kantara 1, and in Kantara 2 there is an visibility. Even the antagonist, the primary antagonist, later it was revealed, but it was women. So what changed in between these two scripts? Because the crew is same and the writer is same, director is same, and there was less representation there, and there are some under-representations as well. Merely we can say in Kantara Part 1, Kantara for first film, women are even objectified more. But in Kantara Chapter 1, it's less compared to the first part. Like, what do you think, what has changed in between these two makings? Because the crew and everyone are the same for both of the films.
So the comparison, as I told, yes, in Kantara chapter 1, the representation is little like it has enhanced compared to the Kantara 1. But still, there is misrepresentation and objectification. If you see, even when that the new king comes into power, and there is a lot of maybe the way he takes alcohol, he behaves with the women and other things, it is there, but not with the heroine, right? And even though the representation is there with the Kanakavati, Kanakavati, the princess, or the queen, okay. So even then the power is not in her, okay. The power is always with the man, and only the Rishabh Shetty has that power to control and everything and the other thing. So somewhere we felt that the representation, though there is representation, the intensity of the character is less. And yeah, and one more thing, we have to also see the time period of these two films, where the Kantara 1 is more of contemporary, whereas Kantara chapter 1 was it was the prequel of the Kantara. So there is a lot of queens and kings, everyone, but the intensity and the power is always on the man.
Right.
That is what we just thought, and we wanted to just focus on the gender representation in these two, and gender hierarchies in these two films.
Good, good. Other questions for anybody else? I don't have any specific questions for any one of you. I think all of these are remarkable work. You know, every one of these are worthy of being developed very carefully. So, yeah, a question? No? Okay. Any looks like, are you going to ask a question? No. Uh, Looks like it's a relatively non-inquisitive group, or the group has got their questions answered, or everybody's tired and hot. So whatever be the reason, I think we can call it excellent session as, sorry, you had a question. Okay, sure.
You pointed out about Kantara and about the mythological narratives, and you raised a question about in reality how is it possible to um, you can in South India, particularly in two film industries, in Kannada as well as in Telugu. You notice there is a significant inclusion of mythological narratives in the recent times. You can notice there are many narratives in Kannada as well as in Telugu. You have films of these kind. And this needs to be understood as the larger project of a national project of Hindutva and all of those. And because these are largely funded projects. And you find narratives after narratives, very consciously producing meaning and trying to infuse certain religious notions with a very clear-cut agenda. So that is why we could notice that profoundly in Kannada, to a larger extent in Telugu also.
Actually, I'm not doing research on this, but I pay attention to it given a communication person. I think that is happening not only in the regional language films, but it is also happening in the so-called national Hindi language films as well. And it is not only a phenomenon that's about India, it is indeed a phenomenon that's becoming global in the nationalist, populist kind of politics that we are starting to see. But good, I think there were two people who were absent, right? So with two people fewer, we should be closing down now. And I'll hand it back to you.
I would like to thank Dr. Ananda Mitro for your insightful comments and for expertly moderating this session. And now I would also like to thank all our presenters for their insightful and thought-provoking contributions. We have now come to the end of the paper presentations for these sessions. With this, we come to the end of technical session 1. We hope the exchanges during this session inspire further research, collaboration, and dialogue. Thank you once again for your participation. We wish you an enriching experience for the remainder of the ICA Hub Conference 2026. Before we conclude and disperse, I would like to request all our presenters and our esteemed session chair to kindly join in for a group photo.